In the summer of 1720, a single share in the South Sea Company changed hands for roughly £1,000. A year earlier, the same share had cost a little over 100. Dukes and shopkeepers, poets and clergymen, even a sitting member of Parliament's footmen, poured their savings into one promise. Within months, that promise dissolved. Fortunes that had taken a lifetime to build vanished in a season. What looked like the surest investment in England turned out to be one of the most carefully managed deceptions of the age. This is the story of how a company that barely traded anything became the original con. The South Sea Company was founded in 1711 by the politician Robert Harley and the financier John Blunt. Britain had emerged from years of war buried under an enormous national debt, and the company was sold as the cure. In exchange for taking on that debt, it received the right to trade with Spain's colonies in South America. The following year, it was granted the Asiento, a contract to ship enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. The trade itself was modest and often unprofitable. But the company's real business was never truly commerce. Its real business was the debt of the British state and the confidence of the people who held it. By 1718, the company had attracted the most valuable endorsement in the kingdom. King George I agreed to serve as its governor, lending the throne's own name to the enterprise. To ordinary investors, this looked like a guarantee. If the king himself stood behind the South Sea Company, surely it could not fail. That belief was exactly what the directors needed. Respectability was the product they were selling, and royal patronage was the finest packaging money could buy. Behind the coat of arms and the grand offices at South Sea House, the company was quietly preparing a scheme that would test how much a nation could be persuaded to believe. In 1720, the company made an audacious proposal to Parliament. It offered to take over the bulk of the national debt, some £32 million, and convert it into company shares. The plan rested on a simple trick. The higher the share price climbed, the fewer shares the company needed to hand out to debt holders, and the more were left over for the directors to sell. In other words, the directors had a direct financial interest in inflating their own stock. To win the vote, the company distributed shares to politicians, courtiers, and royal favorites, often on generous credit. It was bribery dressed as opportunity, and it worked. Once Parliament approved the scheme, the price began to climb, and John Blunt understood how to keep it climbing. The company lent investors money to buy its own shares, then issued fresh subscriptions to draw that money back in. New buyers paid only a small deposit, so a modest sum could control a large stake. Each rise drew in more buyers, and each new buyer pushed the price higher still. From £128 in January, the shares reached £330 by March, £550 by May. The machine was feeding itself, and almost no one wanted to look too closely at how. The fever spread far beyond the South Sea Company. In the narrow lanes around Exchange Alley, where investors gathered in the coffee houses to trade, promoters launched hundreds of new joint stock ventures, some 200 in all. They promised everything from importing walnut trees to ensuring marriages against divorce. One notorious scheme advertised a company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. Crowds still handed over their money. Parliament responded in June with the Bubble Act, which banned new companies without a royal charter, partly to protect the South Sea Company itself from the very speculation it had unleashed. Even the sharpest minds in England were swept along. Sir Isaac Newton, master of the Royal Mint and the most celebrated scientist alive, held thousands of pounds in South Sea stock. He sold early and took a tidy profit. Then he watched the price keep rising, was drawn back in near the peak, and was caught when it collapsed. His losses are often estimated at around £20,000, a staggering sum for the time. He is said to have remarked that he could calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. If Newton could be fooled, almost anyone could be. The peak came in August 1720, with shares near £1,000. Then confidence cracked. As the directors and their favored insiders quietly sold, the price began to slide, and the loans that had fueled the rise now turned deadly. Investors who had borrowed to buy were forced to sell to cover their debts, and every forced sale pushed the price lower. By September, the shares had fallen to around 400, and by December to roughly 100. The machine that had fed on rising prices now devoured itself in reverse. Across Britain and Europe, families who had felt wealthy in the summer were ruined before the year was out. The human wreckage was immense. Merchants went bankrupt overnight. Estates were sold, marriages collapsed, and contemporaries reported a marked rise in suicides among the ruined. The pamphleteer Archibald Hutcheson had warned all along that the shares were worth no more than about £200, but few had listened while the price soared. Now public anger turned on the company and the government that had blessed it. The satirists went to work. William Hogarth's engraving showed the public riding a grotesque carousel of greed, a vision of a society that had gambled its reason away. The country wanted answers, and it wanted someone to pay. Parliament recalled itself in December and launched a committee of secrecy, which met behind closed doors through the first half of 1721. Its investigators found falsified records, hidden share allocations, and a trail of bribes reaching into the heart of government. John Blunt, the architect of the scheme, turned informer and named names in exchange for leniency. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, John Aislabie, was found guilty of corruption, expelled from the Commons, and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Others were impeached. To compensate the victims, Parliament confiscated the estates of the company's directors, who lost on average more than 4/5 of their wealth. Out of the wreckage rose Robert Walpole. As the crisis broke, he helped steady the nation's finances, and in doing so he protected the king and the most senior figures at court from the full force of the inquiry. Some historians argue he shielded powerful allies even as lesser men were punished. Whatever the truth of his motives, the result was clear. Walpole emerged as the dominant figure in British politics and is often called the country's first prime minister. The South Sea Company itself survived, stripped of its glamour, and lingered on in a diminished form for more than a century before it was finally wound up. 3 centuries later, the South Sea bubble still reads like a blueprint. A respectable name, a powerful endorsement, easy credit to draw people in, insiders selling quietly while the crowd buys, and a price untethered from anything real. The bubble was not built on a clever new technology or a distant discovery. It was built on belief, carefully manufactured, and ruthlessly exploited. The people who engineered it understood that the most valuable thing they could sell was not trade or treasure, but confidence. That is what makes 1720 the original con. And it is why, every time markets lose their reason, historians reach back to the South Sea Company.